Reflexive verbs. Reflexive verbs are used when the subject of the sentence does something to or for him or herself. For example, it is possible to bathe a puppy or child, but when a person bathes oneself, then the action is reflexive. This idea makes more sense with some verbs more than others, so study the forms and meanings carefully. As you notice the forms of the reflexive verbs, you will find that they have a new element that other verbs haven't. They have reflexive pronouns. Unlike the subject pronouns that we've seen, yo, tú, él, ella, etc., these reflexive pronouns must be used with the verb forms. Also, when the verb is conjugated, then the reflexive pronouns come before the verb, and when the verb is not conjugated, then they will come after the verb and attached to it. Let's see the examples. First of all, these are the conjugations for reflexive verbs. These are important to know, so memorize them and practice them. Acordarse, starting at the top left, is a reflexive verb. And I know that because of the little part se at the end. If you look up any verb and it has a se at the end, that means that that verb can be used reflexively. The main verb, acordar, is an AR verb. The se portion at the end acts independently as a pronoun. It's almost as if it were two words, acordar and se. The se changes or turns into something else depending on who the subject is, and will either come before acordar or after acordar. And we'll talk about when it can come before or after, more specifically in a second. In the meantime, let's take a look at the conjugations for acordarse. If it's yo, we would say me acuerdo. Yo is optional. Yo can be used for emphasis or for clarification as to who the verb is referring to. Me, however, as a pronoun, has to be used with acuerdo because with reflexive verbs, we have to use the reflexive pronoun along with it. And in this case, me is the reflexive pronoun when we use yo. When we're using tú, the reflexive pronoun is te. So we would say, tú te acuerdas. The tú is optional. The te, however, is mandatory. We have to say te acuerdas. With él, ella, and usted, the se is mandatory. Se acuerda. With nosotros, the nos is mandatory. Nos acordamos. And with the ustedes, ellos, and ellas form, we have se, once again, mandatory, se acuerdan. Alright, so the subject pronouns are in the top, in the gray. Yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, ustedes, ellos, and ellas. The gray portion, the subject pronouns are optional, again, to clarify or give added emphasis as to who we are referring to. The me, the te, the se, and the nos portion of these verb conjugations is mandatory and has to be used with them. So study these different forms for all of these reflexive verbs. We will use these to describe our daily routines. Here are some examples. Example 1. Yo me baño. The reflexive verb is conjugated, and so the pronoun will come before it. Notice how the se disappeared off of the back part. The verb is bañarse. Again, the se was taken off. It turned into me because we are referring to yo. And it gets placed in front of the verb. So we end up with yo me baño. Or we could shorten it and just say me baño. Example 2. Yo necesito bañarme. Notice how we have two verbs, necesito, and then some form of the reflexive verb, bañarse. Notice how, as a second verb, bañarse, the main root or verb, bañar, doesn't change, just as with all of our other verbs. However, the se portion, the little pronoun at the end, does still change. So in a two-verb rule situation, the verb itself, bañar, in this case, will stay the same. The pronoun, however, does still change. It will come at the end and be attached to the verb. Let's take a look at example 3. Ella se cepilla los dientes. The verb is cepillarse. Cepillarse is reflexive and it means to brush. The reflexive verb is conjugated, and we know that because it doesn't have an AR after cepilla, so it's not cepillar. And so the reflexive pronoun is going to come before. All right? So for ella, the reflexive pronoun is se. So it stays the same. It's still se. However, it does need to come before the verb cepillar, since cepillar has been conjugated to cepilla. Let's take a look at example 4. Él necesita cepillarse los dientes. Here we have a two-verb situation. Él necesita, he needs. And then we have a second verb, cepillarse. The interesting thing about cepillarse being used as a second verb here is that cepillar is going to stay the same. The pronoun, the reflexive pronoun for él, is se. And since it is a second verb and cepillar is not conjugated, it's going to stay se, it's going to come after the verb cepillar, and it will be attached. Okay? So, that's an explanation. We'll practice some more in class and with our homework. So study these, and we will practice some more.